So you guys remember that your grandmother said that there's sort of two ways to describe a condition like Pachyonychia congenita. You can describe what it looks like on the outside. That's called the phenotype. That was one of those big words, right? And then there's the genotype, and that's more what's going on inside the cells in your body that make you look like that on the outside. Does that make sense? If you guys want to come, I took some toys out of your toy box. I don't know if your grandmother thought that was okay or not, but I did. I took some. Do you guys want to come and sit down and take a look at this? Because I'm going to use this to kind of describe what's going on inside your cell. So I want you to pretend that this is a cell. Okay? Do you guys know what a cell is?
No. A blood cell?
A cell is like the little tiny parts of your body that make up all of, so on your skin.
What kind of cell is that? A white blood cell or a red blood cell?
We're going to pretend that this is a skin cell. You know what? I think that listen to what I say, and when you have questions, I'll let you ask all the questions you want at the end. How does that sound? Okay. So we're going to pretend this is a skin cell. Okay? And that this is the outside. This is only a part of it. The cell, let's pretend it's really big. This is the outside part. And this part right here is the center part. That's the nucleus. Okay? And the nucleus has something in it called DNA. All right? And we'll get to that in a minute. But what I'm trying to get at is that what causes a problem with Pachyonychia congenita is keratin. Okay? And this is kind of like a little pretend piece of keratin. And what does keratin do? Keratin is like a filament. It's like a rod that all the little keratin molecules line up together and make a really firm little rod that helps hold the cell together. It helps hold the cell into its shape. It's like the boards in your house help give the house its shape, right? And if you don't have good keratin, then it makes the cell very breakable. It doesn't hold its shape as well, and it can break open, and it can cause problems. And that's what happens to that's why you get blisters on your feet. It's because the cells are breaking open because the keratin isn't normal. Okay? But the question comes, why isn't the keratin normal? And that's that word genotype. It has to do with genetics, genotype. And genetics, that means this DNA. So we're going to pretend this is DNA inside of your cell. Right? And if you were to look at it, your DNA is made up of all kinds of little building blocks, kind of like Legos, right? They're like little building blocks. And they match up with each other in the right way so that they all stick together properly, and they're just hanging out in the middle of your cell, okay, in the nucleus. But if you have a mutation in one part of your DNA, let's pretend this black part is a mutation in that, then it still hangs together just fine in the DNA, but it's there, okay? And so what happens is you have another kind of molecule called RNA that matches up with this, right? But if you've got a black part, right, so let's just say you've got your DNA and your RNA, and it's normally like this. But let's say you have a mutation. If you have a mutation in your DNA, let's say this little black part is a mutation, what happens with the RNA, it copies this. And when it copies it, it copies the mutation in the RNA, right? Like that. And when that happens, then the RNA passes on to the protein, which is the keratin, which makes the keratins this mutation. This little building block is a mutation, and it won't go any further. It messes up the rest of the keratin filaments. So you can't get these nice long filaments anymore. You get these ones that are shorter or not holding their structure very well. All right? And when that happens, then the cell kind of falls apart because the cell doesn't have a good structure inside of it. Right? Does that make sense? Okay? So there's different layers of the skin, and maybe I'll just draw on the board real quickly how it happens. If this is the top of your skin, all right, and this is sort of the epidermis, all right. This is a place between the top layer of skin and the next layer of skin. This is called the epidermis. Okay, and in the epidermis is exactly what you were saying. You have cells. Okay, and all of these cells line up like this. All right, and different cells, so if there's just there's a whole bunch of layers of these cells, right? And as these cells get further towards the top, they get kind of more spread out. Okay? And finally, they are just sort of all meshed together, and this is the very top part of your cells, right? So what happens is, in Pachyonychia congenita, normally these just differentiate and these cells slough off, and you have skin that looks like Kelsey's, right? But if you have Pachyonychia congenita, your keratin, just like you said, it's not right. It doesn't hold the structure. So if you have trauma, like on the bottom of your feet where you're walking or running all day, if you have trauma, then it breaks those cells apart, okay? And the cells might break here or they might break here, but when they break, then it causes a blister to form, right? So if these cells were broken right there or right here, then you get a blister right underneath that, and that hurts a lot, right? And the body normally responds when you get trauma, when you get hurt. There's a particular type of keratin called keratin. There's 4 keratins that we know of that really respond. Really respond when you injure yourself to try to reinforce the cells, right? And so that's keratin 6A, keratin 6B, keratin 16, and keratin 17, okay? So if you have a mutation in any one of those keratins, then you can have Pachyonychia congenita. And if you have a mutation in any one of those keratins, when your body has trauma, and the trauma actually causes them to make more of this keratin, then what happens is that the skin gets thicker and thicker and thicker, trying to respond to that injury. And that's why you get that thickness on the bottom of your feet. It's trying to protect you, but at the same time, it's sort of causing the cycle to just keep going more and more.
So let me get this straight. If one of those things doesn't work properly, it can't help your thing, and since your body just copies it, it.
Right. So your DNA is in every single one. Every single one of these cells has a nucleus, right? And your DNA that has that mutation is in every single one of these cells. And so if you don't have a good copy of one of these genes, if you don't have a good one, then you're going to have Pachyonychia congenita. Does that make sense? Now, I know there are some questions, too, from...
Dr. Richmond, doesn't it seem like that these keratins are expressed more in the palms and soles and the nails and other keratins?
Absolutely.
So that's one reason why they get the location. There's trauma, and there's also locations where those keratins are expressed.
Right. So Dr. Hansen asks a really great question. Did you guys understand that? What he's saying is that some parts of your body make certain kinds of keratins, and it turns out that the nails and the hand, the palmar, as you say, the palmar surfaces of the hand, and the plantar, the bottoms of the feet, all of those places like to make these type of keratins. Okay? So, for example, you don't make keratin 6A, 6B, 16, or 17 much on your face at all. Okay? So you don't get Pachyonychia congenita on your face, right? But you make a lot of these types of keratins in your nails and your feet and your hands, and so that's the place where it comes out. And the more trauma you have to those areas, the worse it gets in those spots. Does that make sense? What if I had a mutation in keratin 6A, right? Which actually, we know that's true. That is where Sam has a mutation, is in 6A. You were right, all right? And what if Russell, a person from a different family, had a mutation in keratin 16? Would it be possible that there would be differences in the way that the cells reacted? And we talked about earlier in our meeting that Russell tends to feel like his feet are the worst in the wintertime. And Sam, you said that you feel like your feet are the best in the wintertime, right? So is it possible that maybe these keratins react differently between summer and winter? It is possible, and that's a great idea. And that's exactly part of what the Pachyonychia congenita project is all about. PC Project wants to study that. We want to know whether or not those different genetic changes, the genotype, affects the clinical phenotype that we talked about. right? We're trying to find medicines that can help specifically target these keratins that will make them better. So, for example, one thing that's really interesting is that you end up having keratins from your mom and from your dad, right? Okay, so your keratin from your mom, we know your mom has Pachyonychia Congenita. So she has one that has a mutation in it, right? But your dad has a normal one. He doesn't have Pachyonychia Congenita, right? So he's got a normal keratin 6A. It would be possible that we might be able to find medicines that could specifically reduce the amount of this mutated keratin. And then your normal keratin could take over and you could have a more normal cell. That's one type of medicine. How could it be that his mom, Jan, did not have a mom or a dad that had PC, and yet she ended up with it? And what that means is that when she was a baby, growing, just when she had been fertilized, just about as from the egg and the sperm, whole thing right there. When that happened, and she started developing in utero inside her mother's womb, like what you were talking about, congenita meaning, when she was developing, a mutation happened. Okay, it's called a spontaneous mutation. And it happened to happen in that keratin 6A gene. But once it was there in her, then she had a copy of that mutation that she was then able to pass on to you and your brother. You have an egg and you have a sperm. Well, let's make the sperm look more like a little wiggly line. All right? And normally, so let's just do this for you, all right? Your mom had a keratin 6A gene that had a mutation, but your dad had a normal keratin 6A, right? And so when they came together, they grew into an embryo that became you. So this is Sam, all right? And all the cells in your body have a keratin 6A that's mutated from your mom and a normal keratin 6A from your dad. It only takes one gene. So you're asking me, half of my keratin 6A is bad, and half of my keratin 6A is good. So I'm half PC, but that's not true. Because what you have is what's called an autosomal dominant condition. That's what Pachyonychia Congenita is. It's autosomal dominant. So that means that it only takes one bad gene to have the disease. Why is it that it only takes one? You would think that the other good keratin would be able to make up the difference and work just fine without the bad gene, right? So why doesn't it compensate? But the reason is because keratin, so let me start over here. So keratin, the way it works, it's a filament, right? And it makes these long strands with all the keratin molecules attached to each other. And they bind together with a partner keratin. So keratin 6A binds with keratin 16. Okay, and it binds, and this isn't a very good drawing, but in order to really make a good strong filament, you have to have 6A with 16, or you can have 6B with 17. Okay? And but what happens is if you have a mutation in one of those, in one of these right here, then all of a sudden it breaks up the ability to make a nice filament. You can't make a nice filament anymore because you've got one of these bad ones in it. That's what's called a dominant negative mutation. What happened to your mom is that when she was developing, her mom and her dad, okay, they both donated a good keratin 6A. All right, they were both just fine. But when she was developing, one of the cells, when it divided to make the rest of her body, a mutation happened. Do you know a mutation could happen any cell division? It can happen. It does happen all the time. Cells get mutations in them all the time. The only thing is we don't know about it because it usually doesn't hit an important part. But in your mom, it hit exactly the right place on keratin 6A.